Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Jet Rails podcast. I'm Robert, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about the intersection of e-commerce and freight. Uh, we know that goods get to us somehow. We know there's a supply chain, but we don't always talk about what's happening there. And for so many businesses that we're transacting in person, including in B2B operations, business to business, there are oversized items. There are items that are sold by the pallet or otherwise in bulk. And these aren't always things that are going to get delivered by a normal UPS or FedEx truck or by the post office or around the world really by these sorts of more retail delivery operations. Often there's going to be something that's going to go in some form of freight truck, whether it's lighter than load LTL or in some other fashion. And so to talk about the ins and outs, including all of the disruption to to supply chains this year, we brought in an expert from the Kuhn & Nagel team. We've got Tony here with us. So Tony, with no further ado, would you do the honor of introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. It's exciting to be with you today. It's an interesting time for e-commerce, actually for commerce in general. Some challenging times, having to adjust and adapt. So it's very timely having this discussion. I appreciate the time and opportunity. So my name is Tony Charland, and I work with Kuhn & Nagel, and we've been in the industry since 1890.
Is that all?
That's all. So it is a organization that was started, by our founders, August Kuhn and Frederick Nagel, and that was back in 1890 in Bremen, Germany. So that they have a long history. We've been around for a long time, about 130 years of knowledge. Started out more in the ocean freight side, and then became a full supplier of all modes, including air, ocean, road logistics, and contract logistics. So it's got a nice lineage to it. It's got a good story to it. If you're ever interested, I'd recommend checking it out. They do a nice job on our website, basically giving a nice description of where the company came from. And they're now based in Schindellegi, Switzerland. So that's now our headquarters.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
Well, I know who to ask for chocolate next time he visits the home office.
You got it. So what I'd say is my background is LTL transportation, less than truckload. Basically something that's not fitting quite in parcel. It's not a small package. It's not a full truckload, but it's somewhere in between. It can be palletized, non-palletized. And that's the space that the LTL e-commerce division of Kuhn & Nagel works in. So our division was acquired by Kuhn & Nagel back in 2015 as part of a Retrans acquisition in North America. So Retrans has had a long placement in the industry and was heavy in intermodal, less than truckload. And this was a nice acquisition for Kuhn & Nagel to essentially expand their operations in North America. And what I would say is for a little while, so back in 2015, we kind of stayed and kept our own name. We were known as Retrans for a number of years. Last year, we officially rebranded, over to the Kuhn & Nagel name and accepted the LTL e-commerce placard. It's a little awkward, unfortunately, because it doesn't really speak to the fact of what we're really doing for many people who maybe aren't industry savvy or aren't involved in transportation. So it's a way for us to basically get those heavier products, that stuff, like I said, that falls in between parcel and truckload, and get them to an end destination. That's our goal. And that's the space that we've worked in for better than 30 years. We started off in a venture capital environment for a number of years, for about 2 decades, and private ownership prior to that. During this last acquisition, my opinion, we found our home. Kuhn & Nagel is a large organization that has very, very strong foundation and looking to grow in North America.
Yeah. And I'm going to pull back to the retrans freight side of things and to that history of the company, the reason that I had been familiar with your team for years had to do with delivery of items from the e-commerce merchant to the end user. And so often that was, as I mentioned earlier, often for B2B sites, or, people need to deliver a treadmill. They need to deliver a surfboard. I don't know, something that just isn't going to fit very well within the normal parameters, whether by size, by weight, or some mix of the two, into a traditional shipping or delivery offering. And something where it's got to be picked up from some loading dock. There's got to be or there's no loading dock and it needs a lift gate on the truck. You get into all these complications. And one of the major problems that I think that those that have attempted this have found is that there are pretty specific delivery networks within places like the United States. So if you pick one particular carrier, like FedEx Freight or Yellow, or you could start picking one after the other. They might be better at specific routes or specific meeting specific needs. And if you pick the wrong one, and basically the price is going to price itself out of the market, that the shopper is never going to say yes to spending, $1,000 for what should be a $400 delivery in most situations. That there's some complication here in getting all this right and getting the right options into the e-commerce checkout. What have you found the real alignment is in that sense with the e-commerce market? Is it just getting the right transportation companies into the checkout and pricing it properly? Are there other kind of layers to that your team has been working with for years? Where is it that you find that merchants usually have the most trouble?
Sure. That's actually a great question, because I have to say, and I'll kind of be a little bit elusive with the answer, only to open up for a little more dialogue, to be honest. There's a number of different pain points. There's going to be when it comes to heavy transportation. It's not parcel. It's not, a single box that is a certain size, that is a certain weight, that gets from point A to point B. The characteristics of something in an LTL or a less-than-truckload environment can be varying, so varying. It could be something palletized, as you alluded to earlier, something fixed, a 48 by 48 by 48 pallet, and very nice and easy to deliver. And maybe it goes from dock to dock, and it fits perfectly within an LTL network. That's not really the reality of most freight these days. More often than not, it could be something a little bit oversized and a little bit awkward, or something that has certain, dimensional characteristics, or just heavy. Maybe it takes, like you said, a lift gate at the destination, or maybe it takes some special handling. So
I've got a piano in my head now, trying to deliver
no,
that.
Please, no. We don't want no more piano.
Can you lift that up to the 10th floor of the building? Is that?
It's actually interesting. So I would say that's probably not in your true LTL space. However, there are, and we do partner with, a number of what is considered final mile or last mile white glove services, where the end destination is a courier that's prepared to do a flight of stairs, a 2 or 3 man delivery, or removal of dunnage. And we provide those services. We absolutely can recommend partners that make sense in that space. I will say that's not the bulk share of what we do. The bulk share of what we do really fits within that space that you spoke about, either a traditional B2B, where you're going dock to dock, or a B2C, where you're now delivering it to a consumer. So maybe you do need a lift gate. Maybe you're delivering it, over the threshold at a person's home. Those types of things are pretty normal and regular for us. I will say, our origins really, when you go back, is just LTL transportation. That's who we are. We've lived this space for so many years. So what I would say is somewhere around 2005, we started embarking on a technology called web services. And that was really for us to kind of bring everything we had from an operational standpoint, be it the rating be it the visibility of the freight, or be it audit functions. We tried to consolidate it all into a single consolidated platform. So we used web services technology to do that. Well, it was interesting. Within about 1 year, we realized, wow, this is great technology. Nowadays they refer, there's different flavors. They refer to APIs, application program interfaces. So those technologies are still actively utilized. They've evolved over time, and they have a whole bunch of acronyms that I won't bore you with. But those technologies have really opened up a space to say, let's take this technology that we have, that we built for our own organization, and expose it out to the general public. Let's allow for shippers. Let's allow for people who are running B2C or purchasing platforms. So everybody's thinking outbound, right? Don't forget about purchasing platforms. There are many purchasing platforms that are multi-manufacturer, multi-distribution that you can purchase from. We're tied into those kinds of platforms as well.
So like the Arivas and that sort of thing, where people are doing like a punch out operation and
the best way I can explain it, we do a lot of business in restaurant equipment. That's a very good space for us. And in restaurant equipment, there are a number of platforms. I won't throw too many names out. I don't want to breach any restrictions or anything like that. But the platforms that are out there that we're tied into, for an example, is maybe I want to go to a single platform. I have a brand new restaurant that I'm opening up, right? And what I want to do is I want to be able to say, I need a refrigerator from this company. I need a fryolator from this company. I need a hood vent from this company. And I can build a single purchase order in a single spot, one place. And what we do is we're the rating component and the visibility behind that. So what we do is to say, okay, I've got multiple origin points. It's coming from multiple places and going to a single place. And I can cost that out through this platform as a buyer. One single access, create a PO, get the freight and delivered cost of an entire project. I mean, that's exciting stuff. And that's really our origin. It's kind of interesting that we evolved into the e-commerce space, but our origin in this market really was on that purchasing side.
Yeah, well, and it's not even just, I know we touched on some of this, but it's not even just the weight, the origin, the destination, the size. You're also having to factor in, in terms of things like lift gates, in terms of things that, some of that last mile courier kind of need in order to properly deliver or do what has to be done. So I think in some ways it can be more complex. Let alone getting the routes right and figuring out, who's got trucks that are going to, because it's kind of like I've had the experience of, if you want to rent a car at one airport and you want to drop it off in another city at another airport when you're done with it, depending on which rental companies you look at, the price is going to be tremendously different, because some of them, they don't want a car up wherever it is. Like, that doesn't help them. So it's figuring out the routes a little bit too, giving those sorts of options. In reality, a system like yours, about how many different carriers might you work with in any given year? What kind of a network does that wind up looking like?
So we roughly work with about 15 different partners. We try to consolidate among the partners. And what that allows for us to do is have predictable behaviors in many cases. So we try to bring an opportunity to the table, commit a certain amount of business so that the carrier knows what are the requirements, how do we need to handle this freight. We also try, you brought up a good point in terms of picking the right carrier. In an e-commerce type environment, when you're doing deliveries, let's say to a residence, it's important to try to limit the handling of the product, right? And I would say in a traditional LTL network, like the larger carriers, you threw some names out earlier, FedEx and et cetera, those networks, being national in scope, have multiple touch points. And again, it doesn't, you don't need to think about it too much to imagine that it has to have multiple touch points, right? Because you're picking up at a certain spot, you're bringing it to a terminal, you're then directing it towards another destination. Sometimes it hits what's called a break bulk in the middle. where it's kind of like a stopping off point where it consolidates freight to go to another spot.
So like a
And
distribution
so
center in the middle, you had to reorganize and get the stuff on, so you get it from the East Coast to the West, but now is it going to Washington State or California or Oregon or,
you got it. So those midpoint break bulks, that's an extra handling step in a national network. That's a little bit, makes things a little bit, it's handled more, a better chance of damage, obviously. So what we try to do is if we can position what are considered regional carriers for our customers, they don't work in that traditional hub and spoke. They have many deliveries that are basically terminal to terminal. So you take that break bulk out of the equation. So what we try to do is look at our customers' transportation needs, align the appropriate carriers to remove the amount of handling as much as we possibly can. Now, in an environment where, let's say, it's drop shipments directly from a vendor to the customer, and maybe the distribution person is just a third party, that's a little bit more complex to build out that kind of regional network. But for those that are, say, maybe working on a specific DCs, and they have certain distribution centers that are, geographically located, makes perfect sense to align the appropriate regional carriers and only have the national carriers for the types of transportation that moves, beyond those regional networks. So it's interesting. And just to talk a little bit about the complexity, you're right. I mean, the liftgate and the residential delivery, those are what's called in the LTL industry accessorial fees, right? And you have to understand what is required to manage that shipment going from point A to point B. You need to know that at the end destination, there's no dock, that you need to have a lift gate to lower it down. It's not safe for a driver or somebody to try to muscle this heavy product off of a truck. You need to lower it down nicely to the ground, then, deliver it to the end destination, be it threshold, be it curbside delivery. Add into the equation that LTL transportation has what's called a classification, component that comes to it, where every product, it's not simply dimensions, it's every product has a classification that's assigned to it by the LTL industry, essentially. It's National Motor Freight Bureau, right? Essentially, what they do is they say, okay, this product has a specific density and size typically, and we'll apply this class range to it. And so the most difficult part for a B2B or B2C shipper of heavy products is taking those characteristics, the classification, the origins and destinations, the accessorial things, and making sure that the catalog that you have for your products are aligned with all the appropriate characteristics that are necessary to generate a rate accurately. And that's the biggest piece that we really need to tackle day one when you start looking at moving heavy freight in that space. And that's something that we specialize in. We have a number of people on our team that are very seasoned in that national motor freight carrier classification. And we would then work with our customers to try to help them understand what characteristics are most appropriate for their catalog and the SKUs that they're shipping.
Yeah. And so I think we've covered some of the background. I'm excited to talk about some of the things that have been changing and evolving in the last year or so. Obviously, as everyone overuses the word, it's unprecedented. So we've seen evolution. Let's start with some of those residential deliveries and more of that direct to consumer, because I imagine that there's been an increase in that segment, if I'm right, because people that would have been buying in person, people that would have been shopping locally, picking up themselves, that sort of thing, that there's been an increase in the move online, and that in many cases that's probably pushed direct to consumer brands, retailers to take product that would have been sold through other channels, brick and mortar or otherwise, and to offer it directly through the web. Have you seen more product flowing that way? Do you have examples of products that align well with that sort of a process?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say is there's really two areas that we've seen personally or experienced with our customers. Definitely the B2C has increased, but I would say equally so, your pickup at store has really grown pretty significantly. So let's say example of a treadmill that maybe you would normally go into a store and acquire and then just take home with you, boxed. Well, maybe now you're placing the order online, but instead of getting a direct delivery to your home, you say, okay, I'd like to go pick that up at the store. So you're still not going into the store in many cases. You can do pick up at curb and all of these other, ways of handling it. And we're still involved in that because, that has to come from either a DC or something in many cases because they're not stocking that much product right in the store, especially because it's very difficult to predict, where are we going to now see pockets of purchases, and especially when it's coming from an online type of channel, right? And then equally so, we've seen that traditional B2C type of purchase where, the customer just wants it delivered directly to the home. So that then pushed into that space that we talked about a little bit earlier, which is more of that white glove and some of those more specialized services where maybe a courier is required.
Even without the courier or the white glove, I imagine the price usually just goes up because it's residential. As you were saying that you're being assessed extra fees because who really wants to take that truck down those narrow streets, try to find parking for that truck, try to deal with whatever, limited space to drop off and deliver and catch somebody while they're home or anything like that. It's got to be at that point more trouble, and probably not something that you can, in most cases, just leave at the doorstep, like a small Amazon package. That at that point you probably need someone to be there to sign for it to accept it.
Yeah, the appointment deliveries are definitely a challenge for an LTL carrier, a traditional LTL carrier. I will say though, and this goes back to, we talked a little bit earlier about the regional carriers. The regional carriers now have actually tried to adapt a little bit. And what they do is instead of having that large 53-foot, truck coming down the residential drive, they are investing in box trucks, smaller box trucks. And they're also, what's nice about that is the driver now does not need to be a CDL approved driver, which you have to have special licensing to drive those 53 footers. You don't have to have a special license to drive a box truck. So now you can get somebody that is over the age of 18. So they don't have to be 21, which is CDL, you have to be 21, right? So now you can get somebody over the age of 18 and they don't have to have any special licensing and they can make that delivery on a box truck.
And so if they could rent a U-Haul, they could go and handle this delivery.
True. But the regional carriers are making pretty significant investments in buying, expanding their box truck fleets. I don't see that as much on the national side, but I'd imagine as we push more and more towards these types of deliveries, that's going to happen over time. I wish I could put my prognosticator hat and tell you exactly when, but it's going to have to evolve.
Well, I'm going to demand an exact date here, but yeah. And so let's shift to the other side of the market, to where I think there's been more chaos, getting the goods in that B2B delivery chain, getting them from the manufacturer, the distributor, whatever form of wholesaler, down to the retailer, down to whoever is going to be ultimately selling those goods to the end user. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Suez Canal closed up with a ship that some rough seas, some rough weather, got lodged in a very unfortunate position. I think that's now been addressed, but there are goods that have been out at sea probably a little too long, and will continue to be as they catch up to the backlog, and that's a bit of a mess. Certainly, that's not the first major issue in the last year plus. It's maybe some icing on the cake. I hope so. I hope that's it. I hope supply chains normalize more and more. But what has it been like on your side of the fence? Because there must have been a point where people were just frantic about moving goods, and maybe some of them still are. What has the impact been for a company like yours?
Absolutely. The LTL industry specifically, I know you were talking a little bit about ocean, and those do have a ripple effect, but typically there's a delayed impact on the road transportation piece. not so much an immediate impact. So we'll be feeling the effect of that shift probably a month from now in reality. But the LTL industry has really taken a hit over the past. It started probably, I want to say, July, August timeframe, where they took a big dip, obviously, right at the time when the pandemic first kind of hit North America, where volumes just went completely flat. Everybody was begging for freight. They were looking for ways to keep their drivers, working, keep all of their employees working. And that really only lasted for about 2 months. That was really your April and May. And then June kind of normalized a little bit. And then by the time you hit August, it started going growing like crazy. It was amazing. And it hasn't stopped because we've got so many things that people probably don't consider when you think about moving a product that is, not a full truck, and not quite parcel. There's a bunch of different things that have caused issues on getting it from where we were at the pandemic stage to where we are now, where there's just too much freight to be had. So let's start with the first catalyst that happened last year. Many people, obviously, you're not traveling, your vacations are postponed, you're home, you're at home for the most part, right? So guess what? I did it. I'm sure you did it. I got a project at home that I want to tackle. All right, I'm going to have a staycation. I need to buy this. I need to buy that to handle my project. I'm going to do some painting. I'm going to maybe put up an addition. I'm going to do something at home to take those resources that I might have used at a vacation and use it at your home. And then what am I going to do with this stimulus money? Well, maybe I'm going to make an acquisition. And that's happening. That had been happening over and over again. So that all by itself wouldn't have been enough to push the LTL industry into a crazy space. So let's make it a little more interesting. FedEx and UPS, they decide that, you know what, our networks are flush too. We're now going to lower the weight limit of what we're going to handle within our networks. So I believe at some point they lowered it to say 75 pounds roughly that they would handle. And then obviously a certain dimensional characteristic. And now guess where that freight is going to go? Into the LTL space. Let's make it worse. Let's start talking about the heavy freight. Truckload capacity had issues. And buyers now are not stocking as much. They're trying to, deliver as much and keep the levels at a reasonable level of active stock. And so when you look at that, what happens? Now I'm not ordering a full truck. I'm ordering a partial truck or an LTL. So now you've got freight coming from the truckload coming down. Okay. Put all of those components together, add some bad weather in February, and you have networks that are in gridlock. And that is where we kind of find ourselves today. And to quote one of my carrier relationships, a gentleman that's been in the industry a number of years, and I really rely on him for a lot of insight. And his phrase was, everyone, we're in the second inning right now of this. There's going to be more time where capacity is going to be the biggest challenge that we have. And what that does, it will probably stabilize most of the customers, our customers that are already in the market. It makes new entrants into the market a bit challenging. You need to be able to find capacity. You need to be able to align with partners, which now is what's happening. I'm sure you've read some of the articles. It's now pushing some of that freight more into the final mile, even if it's not a true final mile type delivery. So now that industry is getting an influx of freight. So interesting dynamics, interesting, whirlwind of things occurring all at the right, perfect storm, right? Yeah, perfect storm.
And it gets difficult because how much hiring do you want to do? How much equipment do you want to buy? How well can you predict what demand is going to be in a year, 2 years, or 3 years? Are a lot of people going to go back to more traditional modes of shopping and shopping channels, brick and mortar and otherwise? Will the economy slow down? We're right now, at least in the United States, there's stimulus money. There's, people getting back to work. There's a lot of good things happening for the economy. But I think what we've all learned is that none of us can really predict all that much about, exactly those ebbs and flows. So I imagine that that's tough on the industry. We saw, companies that were making things like toilet paper say, look, if, we can, run the machines round the clock, and we can, spin up some extra, some extra lines in the factories and do some other things. But at some point, you know, how much do you want us to put out in the market? And then what do we do when everybody's up to their ears in toilet paper at home? It isn't going to buy any more for a year. And we've got all these, this whole supply that's keeps funneling out. Like, they have to try to predict a little bit, and not flood the market in an unhealthy way. And I imagine that it's at some point, the same for some of these companies, that they want to bring more trucks on, and they want to bring more drivers on, and they want to solve the problems, and they'd like to service everybody that comes knocking on their doors. But, everyone in every industry has a limit to how fast and how high they want to scale up for something that they can't fully predict. I mean, for all we know, look, I keep seeing things about self-driving vehicles and trucks, and all sorts of changes to the market. So I guess, investment is always a question.
Absolutely.
I can't see 10 years out.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, it's clear that many of the carriers, the LTL carriers, are making investments in their organizations, opening up new terminals, expanding in markets that, need. I think the term that's used quite regularly. I need drivers, I need docks, I need doors, right? And those are the things that make the LTL industry move. And they're at a point right now where it probably takes, I want to say, 18 months to 2 years to try to really truly create a brand new terminal at a particular location. So your expansion needs to be predicted well in advance. So some carriers were predicting that. I can tell you that a number of the regionals were making expansions, to even 4 and 5 years ago, and are now it's paying dividends because they're getting the benefit of that. But to now say I need to expand is really an 18-month to 2-year proposition. Yeah. So knowing that, it's not like you're moving on a dime. not
yeah, you don't know if by the time that you're done with that move, if it was the best move or not, especially, markets change even locally. I've seen a lot more, and I think that this is a predictor in a good way, a lot more distribution centers opening under lots of different flags here locally in my neck of the woods. Whether that's Amazon or whether that's, just a 3PL or some other kind of distribution center, or, just a lot of warehousing to warehouse and move and organize goods. I think one of the interesting things that people sometimes don't think as much about as it relates to this is that consumers now have an expectation that the end goods will get to them for most orders in a day or two, right? That they don't plan to wait a week or two or more for most things, especially where supply chains are normalized and they're not in the middle of waiting for for something that got stuck on a container ship in the Suez. But that probably creates some interesting effects within the networks that you work with. Because I imagine that instead of taking containers and getting them all into one warehouse where they'll be shipped to shoppers all around the country, that at that point, these things need to go to local warehouses in different regions where they can be delivered, by UPS or FedEx or what have you in a day or two.
Yes. I mean, if you look at the behavior, and it's what we've tried to do for a number of years, the way we there's a little tagline that we use quite often where it says, we'd like to give the LTL industry the parcel experience that people are used to and that people expect. It is the accuracy of what the cost is going to be. It's the visibility of the transportation of your product in movement, and trying to align the expectation of receipt of your goods and making sure that you understand, what that timeline is. But what I will say is that we're making inroads, and we're trying to at least create that transparency for the end buyer so that they understand what's happening with their purchase. And I think that honestly is really the biggest thing. And I think interesting, we've kind of seen a little bit of a change, although, the Amazon type purchases that you see and the next day delivery and second day delivery, a lot of those on the small products are definitely still, happening. There has been a little bit of a backlash though, where you see consumer behavior say, you know what, if I can get this at a lesser cost, I might wait an extra day or two. So I have a feeling you're going to see a little bit of an evolution there in terms of trying to realign expectations and keeping the costs under control. Because let's face it, if we continue with 1 and 2 day deliveries, somebody's going to pay for it. and guess what? It's usually us. It's usually the consumers.
Yeah, that it's whether you're paying for it in a subscription once a year that increases that that those prices go up, whether you're paying for it in the cost of the goods because the price of the goods go up because they're making less on shipping and more on the actual item. It comes somewhere. There's always or in some cases, I don't know. I don't think that this I'm not well educated enough in it, but I don't think that this is the most subsidized industry. But whether it's subsidies for fuel or other things that help keep prices down, like the money comes from somewhere. There's always a money trail. When it comes to thinking about some of those bigger issues, including government. I know when we talk, Kuhn and Nagel is huge and global. When we talk more about, LTL and what have you, we're talking about trucks. And so trucks don't typically go across the ocean. That would be a fun one. But do you deal in your division with things that go over international borders, for instance, between the U.S. and Canada? Do you deal with any of those restrictions and regulations and changes to how those things are going? Has that added any kinks into the works in more recent times?
Yeah. So thank you. That's a good question. LTL eCommerce group of Kuhn and Nagel is, as you said, primarily focused on that. It's the truck. It's the less than truckload shipment. Our footprint, of service, it really covers domestic U.S. And heavy in U.S. to cross-border Canada in either direction, inbound or outbound into Canada. I would say that the regulations really haven't been an issue for us. The relations between U.S. and Canada and the practices of taking freight across the border, it's pretty streamlined, and it has been. Now, that's not to say that we didn't see disruptions last year when things kind of went crazy and you weren't sure who could go where and who could travel where, and all of those complexities that you felt in your personal life, where you kind of felt restricted on travel. Well, the transportation industry felt the same thing, obviously. But as things kind of became a little bit more understood and we tried to get a better understanding of how, the virus is moving and how that is all happening, that all changed, and so that way it's not as bad as what it was a little while ago, during the heat of the pandemic when there was so many questions,
Yeah.
What I would say is, for us, a good expansion that we're working on right now is intra-Canada as well. I will say there's not a lot of transportation players that are automating the transportation component in intra-Canada in terms of having accurate tariffs like we do in the U.S. So our tariffs and rate bases that we use to cost out transportation covers U.S. and then cross-border Canada. It does not cover intra-Canada, which is kind of unique. So that puts a bit of a challenge. So we're working hard at normalizing that so that we can start expanding into shipments intra-Canada.
All right. Maybe it's a good time for those that carry these sorts of items that need LTL here in the States to warehouse some of the goods up there. And look, as long as you don't mind being paid in maple syrup and hockey pucks, and no,
Hey,
some
listen,
some of our favorite
my family's
partners.
from Canada. Come on, Robert.
All right, so it was a little close to home. What could I tell? No, I miss getting to go up to Canada for trade shows, and certainly some of our favorite partners are up there in the
Absolutely.
e-commerce industry, and um, I I think we could use more neighbors like Canada. So, and I'm down in
I didn't
Florida,
take it
so I'm
personal,
really
Robert.
I'm at the other edge.
I didn't take it personal. It's okay. I am a Canuck, but I didn't take it personal.
Well, I mean, if that's how I know that you're a Canuck because you didn't take it personally. Uh, well, at this point, I've probably lost my 5 American listeners somewhere along the way, and now I've lost all 10 of the Canucks that still enjoyed the podcast. So, um, to the couple of people that don't speak English that are still listening, whatever country you're tuned in from, thank you for staying with us. Before we officially wrap it up, Tony, do you have anything that we didn't cover that you think is really important to share? I mean, I know K&N Kuehne+Nagel is huge. Any wisdom from the larger organization or things that you've been experiencing in your division, or any additional prognostication? any Anything really impactful or cool stories from the last year that you think should hit the airwaves?
Yeah, I mean that's a tall order, Robert. I got to tell you, I always have stories. I don't know if you want my stories, but in terms of the industry, it's been a challenging time. It's as you said, unprecedented, unpredictable, and unfortunately, I would say we're probably still in that mode. So what we look for with our partners and with our customers, patience. We need to get through this together when things like unprecedented capacity issues arise, or when I know with our ocean containers, in many cases there's 2-3 week delays just sitting out in the ocean waiting to dock. You have to have a little patience and sometimes a little creativity on how to solve some of those problems, and how to deal with those challenges. And I will say that the approach that Kuehne+Nagel is taking is to try to work with our customers as best we can, because we know how frustrating it is when you've got products that your customers are waiting for that you need to get brought in, and that distribution network, because of a storm or because of some unforeseen event, it can drive you crazy. It's maddening, and we understand that. It's maddening for us as well. We feel the pain, we really do. And so a little patience, a little cooperation, and working together with our partners and our customers. That's really the key to, I think, succeeding in this environment.
I think
I
we've
hope that
seen
helps.
some of the same in web hosting that, well, we've had times where, there have been so many players trying to grow capacity so much where we've had to say, look, we're going to schedule the spin up of this for next week. I mean, we provide a white glove service, so we're going to make sure that everything's really optimized, configured, that everything's done right. And at some point, that means that we believe in everything being done by the A team, right? It's sometimes you need to have those levels of patience to get it done right. And I think that most people, when they have that kind of conversation, they'll work with it, because something that I learned years and years ago in my agency experience, that when I first started in digital agency, was also dealing with traditional printing and that sort of thing. And look, whatever that printed item was, whatever that that flyer, brochure, business card, banner, whatever it was always a rush. And there were two things that would happen. One, we'd sit waiting for them to pick it up, and it would, after we rushed, it would sit. Two, they rushed so much that they didn't proofread it. The phone number was wrong, or some other key piece that we couldn't have possibly known what was incorrect. There was some typo somewhere, and there was somehow magically there was always time for a reprint. It was such a rush, but there was, oh, no, okay, get it, we'll get the reprint from you in a couple of days, no problem. So when people do step back, they can usually plan effectively. I think that there is really something to that in the world. Of course, we all want everything yesterday. Who wouldn't? But that's where partners come in. That's where relationships come in. That's where you get to understand what's actually happening and why something is either reasonable or maybe in your best interest to get it from the right carrier in the right way, rather than rush and have a little bit more, let's say, unknown in the mix, a little bit more risk.
Absolutely. I might even add, if you don't mind, if I could speak to, I'm not sure how many true LTL shippers I've got in the audience, but to those that are shipping in the LTL industry and are, dealing with some of those challenges, my suggestion, I'm pleading, not even a suggestion, I'm pleading, be a good partner. I'll tell you, in a space right now that is overcapacity, the carriers are just as frustrated. Remember now, there's a driver at the end of this that's overworked, that's put in too many hours. There are dock workers that are working weekends and overtime to try to, clear up the networks. Being a good partner and trying to work with the carrier to deliver your goods, that right now is the best thing that you can do for your organization. I know it sounds so a little too touchy-feely, but it's really not. There are ways that you can be a good partner with your carrier supplier, and it will pay dividends. I'm telling you, it will. And if that's something you're looking to do, that's something we do every day. That's what we look to accomplish for our customers. That way, when we hit these types of markets where things go crazy and go sideways, we can provide some reliability and consistency.
Well, and history tells me that when you're good to a vendor consistently, when the proverbial hits the fan, at that point, you'll usually find that you've made good friends, and that they'll really be there to do as much as they physically can for you in a tight spot. And
Absolutely.
so I do think that relationships and industries like yours really do have an impact. I've seen it time and again. Well, Tony, this was a pleasure. I think we definitely educated the masses today a lot on what's been going on in the LTL space. I hope that we have you again in the future, and that we see some cool new tech, and we see more capacity, and things are really normalized, and things are really cooking along. But thank you for coming on board today, and as always, to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll have more great content like this for you in the very near future. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and happy selling.